Hi, my name's Rachel Geddes. I'm the autism practitioner for the Child Health and Disability team based in Inverness at the Pines. The piece of pie I'm going to talk to you about is the emotional development. So let's start by thinking about what the core features of emotional development are. So everybody, as they learn and grow through toddlerhood, into nursery, into primary school, and then into secondary school, we start to be able to identify and understand our own feelings. Those might be quite simple feelings when we're young, such as I'm angry or I'm upset or I'm happy. And obviously those feelings will become more complex as you go through the senior years of school, when you might understand that you're frustrated or that you have feelings for somebody else and that those feelings are different to friendship. Then move on from understanding our own feelings to be able to accurately read and comprehend the emotional states of others. This is a little bit more tricky. So it's thinking about, can I recognise when mum's angry or when my teacher is happy? Following on from that, you then need to be able to manage those strong emotions and express them in a constructive manner. Now, that's really quite tricky, isn't it? When you're 3 and you're angry, it's seen as socially acceptable to be able to throw yourself on the floor and have a bit of a paddy. But that's not seen as acceptable as you get through the primary years and certainly into the secondary years. And that can be quite difficult for kids who've got neurodevelopmental difficulties, because managing those strong emotions is really quite tricky. We then need to be able to regulate our own behaviour. What can I do where? What is acceptable in a certain circumstance? What can I do at school that's different to what I can do at home? How does my behaviour look in the playground as opposed to being in the classroom? And will that behaviour need to be different again to being at home? We then need to consider how we then develop empathy for others. So that's not just about recognising the emotional state of somebody else, such as mum's upset, but developing what does my behaviour need to be in relation to mum being upset. Now, that's quite a tricky thing to be able to do. That's quite a difficult emotion to be able to manage, and then to be able to react in an appropriate way is even trickier. These are hard things to learn. Okay, so building on what I've just said, the intra-intelligence needs to come first. So intra, we're talking about internal. I need to be able to be self-aware and to be able to manage myself in order to then be able to do the interpersonal intelligence, the inter-relating to your relationship with other people around you. So one has to develop before the others can then build on top of them. Okay, so we're focusing on the 3 Ps again, as we've done with the other pieces of pie. So we're going to think about presentation. If the child that you are the parent of, or one of the children in your classroom, is having some difficulties with their emotions and being able to manage those emotions appropriately. So what you might see is an extreme emotional response. You might think, where has that come from? What happened wasn't really that serious, and they're behaving as if it's the end of the world. But to them, that might feel very, very strong, and they've not got an ability just yet to manage that extreme emotion. What we see quite frequently in children is that they will display emotions at a much younger age to their actual chronological age. So you might have a 6-year-old who's still having emotional meltdowns that you might expect of a 3-year-old, because it's really tricky when you've got an emotional difficulty, you've got a neurodevelopmental problem that is impacting on your emotional development, to be able to express your emotions at an appropriate age level. What we also see sometimes is a lack of an emotional response. So something where you might think there should be an emotional response and there isn't. So for instance, I was with a little girl the other night, and whilst I was out on that visit, we realised that one of her new tropical fish had died, and mum was expecting a big emotional response. And the little girl was like, okay, it's fine. I can get another. She wasn't upset. She wasn't distressed, as we would expect a child of her age to be. They might lack the ability to express to you what, or have the words to be able to say to you what that feeling is. So you might be able to see that feeling. You might be able to see that they're angry, or that they're upset, or they're frustrated because something's not going right, but they don't have the words to be able to say to you, I'm feeling really frustrated because this game is not working. It might appear that they're insensitive to the feelings and needs of others. This is not quite true. It's often said that people with neurodevelopmental difficulties don't show empathy and don't understand other people's feelings. And that's not true. A lot of adults, say for instance on the autistic spectrum, will say to you that they do see that feeling, they do understand it, but to actually show you that they understand it is actually really, really difficult. You might see a child who's very, very distressed and upset and extreme crying. And on the opposite ends of that spectrum, you might have a child who withdraws. They want to go under a table. They want to go into a cupboard. They want to go to their bedrooms. They can't deal with those strong emotions. All of these things are really quite common if your child has a neurodevelopmental difficulty that they're dealing with. Okay, so we're still thinking about presentation, what you might see. There are different bits of our brains involved in our emotions. So I'm going to use some big words, some of which I might not pronounce very well. Okay, but what we're thinking about is, let's think about a spider. You see a spider. The first bit of your brain that recognizes that spider is the limbic system and the brainstem. And they go, ah! The next bit of your brain is a little bit more rational, and this is called the orbital cortex or the neocortex. And that goes, whoa, hold on a minute. It's only a spider. It's only little. The next bit of our brain that gets involved is the motor cortex, or I can never say this properly, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And that bit of your brain starts to think about, what can I rationally do in this circumstance? Unfortunately for children, particularly children with neurodevelopmental difficulties, what often happens is that limbic system, that brainstem, takes over, and they go into what we call flight, fight, or freeze. So the flight mechanism is when we think, I've got to run, everything's happening, I don't know how to deal with it, I need to get myself out. So you may see this child completely withdrawing from that situation. They might run out of the classroom or out of the kitchen if you're at home. They might, if they're in senior school, they might be hiding in the boys' toilets trying to get out of classes. They might look like they're daydreaming. They might be avoiding things, hiding, wandering about, or becoming totally disengaged in what you're saying to them. That's the flight. It's the part of the brain that just says, get me out of here, I can't cope. Also involved in this limbic system is the fight. Something's upset me. I'm starting to feel a danger. So therefore, I'm going to respond to what I see as being a dangerous situation. So if my limbic system has seen that spider, my automatic fight response would be to kill the spider. Whereas my automatic flight response would be to run as fast as I can. I'm actually not scared of spiders, so I'd be okay. Okay, but your limbic system's in control. It's acting out. It's becoming aggressive. It's maybe acting sillily. It's exhibiting some defiance. No, I'm not going to do it. It's arguing with you, screaming or yelling, Mom, you're the worst mother in the entire world. I'm sure we've all been there. As a parent myself, I can certainly say I've been there. On the end of this spectrum is the freeze. Okay, so we're still in this limbic system, this immediate system of what is going to happen. Okay, so I might be rigid. I don't know what to do. I can't answer. I can't speak to you. I can't get my needs met. I'm just completely blank. I'm unable to move or unable to act. Okay, so we're on to the second P, the profile. Why might this be happening? So they might have a lack of social understanding. It's being able to understand those emotions. If you don't understand your own emotional development, when other people are then behaving in ways that are confusing to you, because your social development is not as strong, this interpins really quite strongly with your emotional development. You might not understand what you were supposed to be doing. So your teacher said to you, you know, you need to get your ruler, your pencil and your rubber out of your tray. And you've got your pencil and your rubber, but you can't remember what the other thing was. And you lack the confidence to be able to say, please, miss, I don't know what you wanted. Or mum or dad has sent you off to pump up the tyres on your bike. But when you get to the garage, you can't find the pump. So then your emotions, that limbic system overtakes quite quickly, because you get agitated and frustrated quite quickly. You might have difficulty following those instructions. And as we all know, kids with neurodevelopmental difficulties really, really struggle with unexpected change or a lack of predictability. Some things happened. We were supposed to be going to PE. Now we're not going to PE because there's a leak in the gym hall roof. So now we can't go, but that's an unexpected change. I didn't know that that was going to happen, and emotionally I can't deal with that. Your child might have a difficulty staying focused on a task. Lots of kids with ADHD or autism, or even dyspraxia really struggle to understand and stay focused on a task that's maybe broken into too many pieces, or for some kids it's because you've given too many instructions at one thing and they just can't do it. So then that gives you an emotional response. They might be having an overwhelming sensory experience. I was talking to a lovely young man a couple of months ago whose sensory system was getting quite overwhelmed at times, particularly his hearing, which was extremely sensitive, because he could actually hear washing drying on a radiator. He thought that we could all hear the washing drying on the radiator, so hadn't thought to say to mum how upset he got by that. I also worked with another young man a couple of years ago who lived in a 3-story house. So when his mum was shouting to tell him that his tea was ready, because he lived on the 3rd floor, his bedroom was on the 3rd floor, to him, all shouting meant anger. Um, so to him, mum was angry with him every time she shouted for him to come and get his tea. And that wasn't the case. It was just that she needed to raise her voice in order to get the volume heard. So sensory experiences, social experiences, all link into these emotional experiences, and mean that you can't always cope with things properly. We also have some difficulties if you've got the impacts of a poor diet. You're not getting enough nutrients, or you're not getting enough sleep. You know, having disturbed sleep, not getting a full 8 hours or a full 10 hours, depending on your age range, can really make you feel much more emotional the next day. And this might be why your child is showing these hyper emotional states, because of the lack of sleep. Okay, so now we're thinking about the third P. We're starting to develop a plan of how we can support that child. So it's really important that there are trusted adults around that child who are attuned to the needs of that child, can read when that child's feeling upset, when that child's feeling angry, and be able to differentiate between different emotions in that child. For parents, that usually comes quite quickly. We can pinpoint and we can read what our child might be thinking and feeling. If you've got a class of 25 kids, that's going to be more difficult and it's going to take more effort. But it's really important that we are attuned and can figure out what's going on with that child. What's also vitally important is that we have a consistent approach from all of the adults around that child. We can't have dad saying one thing, mum saying another thing, and Mrs. Brown at school saying something completely different about the same subject. If this is something that's really important to this child, we need to have language that we're all using, and we need to all be singing from that same song sheet. We also need to be able to model emotions language. So when we see a child experience an emotion, they might not be able to label that emotion. So we can label it for them. I can see that you look happy. I think that that is because your friend has come to play. You look angry to me. I think you might be angry because I've said no to you having some more sweeties. It's important that we start to label things. What I also do a great deal, both with my own children and the children I work with, is I label my own emotions. So the focus is not just on them. I might say to them, I'm feeling this today, and this is why I am feeling it. So it starts to be a process of swapping and changing information and being open about my own emotions as well helps that child to understand that it's okay to talk about how we are feeling. We might start reducing some of the stressors by managing the environment around them, getting rid of some of the sensory information that's overwhelming by ensuring that our communication is short and concise, and that they know exactly what's expected of them. We might use something that are called self-regulation scripts. Self-regulation is thinking about how we manage our difficult emotions. So one that I use quite a lot is called How Does Your Engine Run? And how does your engine run is thinking about a car. So lads often like this one. And it's thinking about a car that's not running very well because it's not got the right fuel, because it's tired or it's feeling sad. Or a car that's got your foot on the accelerator and you're revving, 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 revving. And that's not a good place to be emotionally. And about how we level that emotion back out. So I often say in conversations with kids, if we're using an engine program, I might say, oh, my engine is not running very well today because I didn't get enough sleep. Or my engine's running really well today because I had my favourite breakfast. Or, oh goodness, my engine's running far too fast at the moment because I was in a rush to get here. I need to do something to help my engine calm down a little bit before we start our work. Something that we could also use is what's called a little deal, big deal script. Okay, so you're thinking about the script. So you're identifying or labeling an issue so that something's wrong. Is this a big deal or is it a little deal? So let's go back to that spider in the bath. Is that spider a big deal or a little deal? Yeah, so then agreeing whether it is a big deal or a little deal. And then we might say, even if the child said, oh, it's a big deal because I'm scared of spiders, you might say, well, actually, it's a little deal because it's only a little spider. So stating the reason why we're saying the reason it's a little deal is because it is little. We might then offer a strategy. So the strategy might be, it's absolutely fine. I can help the spider to get out of here. I'm going to use some paper and a glass and I'm going to remove the spider. And then we're giving general reassurance. The spider has gone. There's nothing left to worry about. Those can be really, really useful. What we also use a great deal with kids, again, about emotional worries sometimes or social behaviour that's then ended in a big emotion. So say, for instance, you've got a social behaviour is that you don't like lining up to go back into the classroom. But the big emotion that brings up is anger because the other kids are jostling you. So we might write a social story or a comic strip conversation about that scenario, about that everybody likes a turn in the line, everybody likes to be first, and that we don't need to be angry. So we're helping a child to understand the thoughts, emotions, and feelings and the social behaviours of another child, which then helps them to regulate their emotion. This can be really very, very useful. We then might need to consider dietary supplements. We might need to consider that a child sometimes has peaks and dips in in their emotional well-being, and we can see that that is related to when they're eating. Certainly when my daughter was very little, we could always tell when she was getting emotionally upset that it was probably to do with her being hungry, and the hungrier she was, the more upset she would get. So we needed to make sure that she was fed little and often in order to be able to manage those emotions. This is sort of when she was sort of like the 2, 3 type age. It's also incredibly important to think about the management of sleep and how we help children to get decent sleep for a decent amount of time. On the Pines website, we have a very detailed film around sleep. We also have a very detailed film around diet and maybe dietary supplements. And we also have films around social stories. If your child's having strong emotions and you think that these things might be of benefit for them, then those are the resources that you would need to go to get some more information and support around those subjects. Okay, so I want us to think about a bucket, okay? And I want us to think about this in relation to stress, anxiety, big emotions. And the size of your bucket is really important because it will mean the bigger the bucket you have, the more able you are to cope. Okay. So in our lives, we need things in our lives that help us to feel good, that help us to feel like things are manageable. That creates what we could call our bucket. So our bucket could be pretty big or it could be pretty small, depending on how we're feeling. So say, for instance, just before the last set of school holidays we had, I was really tired. A lot of things had gone on during that term. So my bucket was pretty small by the end of that term. Probably like one of those little sweet buckets that you get Halloween sweets in. By the end of the holidays, where I was able to relax, I was able to get some decent sleep, I was able to think about what I was doing. I then felt a lot better. So my bucket was much bigger. Had lots of social interaction, lots of sleep, lots of decent food. I'd been to see my mum, so I was feeling a lot better. So my bucket is a lot better. So when we can ensure that there are lots of good things in children's life, it helps them to deal with stress a lot better. Because what we need to think about is that as stress builds up, it fills our bucket. So for a child with a neurodevelopmental difficulty, it might be things like when plans change or they don't understand the instructions or they've got to go to assembly, and that's a massive sensory experience. So if you imagine that all this stress is dripping into your bucket, if you've only got a little bucket, your bucket is going to overflow quite quickly. But if you've got a big bucket, stress can come in, but it's not going to overflow as quickly. I'll be more able to deal with it because I'm already feeling quite good in myself. What we then need to have is taps on our buckets. So it's starting to think about, if I start to feel myself getting stressed, how can I help myself to come back down again? Can I do some digging in the garden? Can I go for a walk? Can I take some deep breaths? For me, it's probably putting the kettle on and having a really nice cup of coffee. So it's thinking about how I manage myself. How big is my bucket? What is the stress coming in? Can I alleviate some of that stress by doing some of the planning that we had on the previous slide? Or what am I going to do to bring myself back out? When I'm working with children, on a one-to-one basis in my caseload, I often get them to write me a massive list of all of the things that make them feel really good. And we share that with parents and with teachers and say, these are the things that help them to have that really big bucket. And then we do another list of the things that I need to do in order to calm down. So we've got two lists that really help us to be able to moderate our emotions and help us with our behavior. It's a really simple thing to do, but it's really, really effective. So say, for instance, you know that you're going to put your child into a position this afternoon that they're going to find quite stressful. Say, for instance, we've got to go and visit Granny, and Granny's got a dog that's quite yappy, but Granny loves to see the kids. So we're going to go and see Granny, but Johnny really doesn't cope with the yappy dog. Well, on Johnny's I love list, we've got that Johnny loves music. So actually, going in where the yappy dog is, we can help him to have his music in. We then might say to Granny, actually, his brother's going to take the dog, we maybe not call it the yappy dog to Granny, he's going to take that dog for a walk while you have a talk to Johnny. Okay, so we've alleviated some of those stresses and we've made things much more manageable. These are really simple, effective tweaks to help people to manage their anxiety and their emotions. Okay, so that's the end of the emotional bit of pie. So, what were your light bulb moments during that presentation? What did I say that you thought, oh gosh, yeah, that's what my child does? And they do that, and they do that, yeah? Write that into the grid. Remember, right from the very beginning, we're writing down and jotting down on a bit of paper or in the grid. It's entirely up to you. And then think about, okay, how can I make this different? If, like Johnny, you've got a kid who doesn't like visiting Granny, how can you make that different? If you've got a child who automatically goes into a fight response to something happening, can I change that? Can I make it so that they don't actually come across that thing? Say, for instance, Tesco's on a Saturday afternoon. My child does not cope with Tesco's on a Saturday afternoon. That's easy. Don't take them to Tesco's on a Saturday afternoon. A lot of the time, what we need to do is little tweaks around what our children can and can't cope with. If I'm working with my own personal child at home who's got some neurodevelopmental struggles, we can only do 20 minutes of homework. That's fine. We don't need to sit for 2 hours and do homework. We can do 20 minutes. Come back an hour later, do another 20 minutes. It's okay. I just need to tweak things so that my child can manage. So what's going to happen now is that there's going to be another couple of slides and they will give you links to some resources that we have in Highland. The first resource I want you to be really aware of is what's called the Just Ask helpline. There are loads of different professionals who work on that helpline on a Tuesday and a Thursday afternoon who you can chat to about your individual child and maybe think through some ideas. The other website thing I really want you to look at is the website for the Pines. It's thinking about all of the different things that might make a difference to your child. And on that website, we have got probably in excess of 30 films now to think about the different intricacies of your child. There's ones about ADHD, there's ones about autism, there's ones about social stories, there's one about making a profile for your child, there's one about sensory differences. There are loads of different resources on that website to help you to manage your child in a different way. Pairing a child with a neurodevelopmental difference is not easy, but sometimes, well, a lot of the time, if I'm honest, it's about changing our behaviour in order to help the child to change. And that's what we need to think about. What can I do differently that is going to make this easier for my child? Thanks for watching this series of films. You might still have a couple to watch, or this might be the last one that you've watched, but I hope you've had some benefit from them and that you can start to think about, what am I doing differently for my child? Good luck, talk to the professionals around you and keep strong. Most importantly, keep your sense of humour.